Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures is a hard-to-define point-and-click adventure game released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis. Known as Hello Pac-Man in Japan and boasting box art advertising a grand adventure for Pac. Featuring the Pac family, the hang glider and minecart segments in Super Pac, and a bright and happy color scheme, almost like the poster for an animated film. And that was exactly what Namco was going for, as they marketed the game as an interactive cartoon and pushed their new Character Guidance Interface, or CGI, trademark, which would present a new take on how adventure games were played. A bold take on a classic character, and adventure games had struggled to make the jump to early consoles, so a new idea for the genre was welcome. And yet, there is no string of Pac-Man adventure games. CGI is found on every box now, but not in the way that Namco intended, and Pac-Man 2 is not exactly remembered fondly, if at all. And that fact has always fascinated me. This is a weird game to be sure, but what exactly did this game do to gain such a negative reputation? And is that even a fair judgment to give, or is this game better left behind? Let's find out. Questionable decisions can be found before the game is even started, as several aspects about the marketing of the game would change as it made its way overseas. While the interactive cartoon aspect would stay on the box and marketing materials, not much else on the box was safe. The most important being the name, as Hello Pac-Man became Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures. This was a terrible idea, and it only succeeded in confusing players, as it immediately drew comparisons to the original arcade game, which, aside from having the same characters, was nothing alike. Pac-Land 2 may have made a bit more sense, but it seems the marketers wanted to tie the game to the most successful game that it could, to the game's own detriment. Hello Pac-Man makes sense with what the game is in a similar vein that Hey You Pikachu does. You do not play as Pac-Man as you do not play as Pikachu. Instead, you play as yourself trying to communicate with the title character. This title change is the equivalent of Hey You Pikachu being released in the US as Pokemon Yellow 2. Also changed was the box art, replaced with a single image of Pac-Man gliding off of a cliff, screaming in terror. If this seems confusing, that's because it is, but it does fit with the new spin on the game that they were making with their commercials. The main television ad for the game is also terrible, and seems to be about how fun it is to bully a kid who is called a special friend.
If you had one special friend.
Hi, I'm your buddy.
And that friend is Pac-Man. The ad tries to make the claim that Pac-Man 2 is a fun game because you get to bully Pac-Man.
No matter how much you abuse him, he'll still come back for more.
And what else could you possibly want to do with him? Everything about the American marketing is bad. I don't know who thought calling Pac-Man a special friend was a good idea, or who thought that the only interesting thing about the game was that you could abuse him. This was the early 90s in video game marketing, however, and stomping on your game before it had a chance to find its audience was par for the course. If you don't believe me, just ask any Earthbound fan. I did find this magazine spread that does a much better job of advertising all of the things that Pac-Man can do. I like that it calls out Garfield for being unable to hang glide. Maybe if the other ads had been more like this, the game would have been better understood before it came out, but it seems the only thing the advertising campaigns could generate was confusion. That confusion lingers if you try to dig into the black hole that surrounds this game's development. Despite my best efforts, finding information on the development of Pac-Man 2 is very difficult. It's a combination of a language barrier, time, and the fact that this game was made when it was common practice for developers to have aliases listed in the credits, as companies were worried about their talent being poached. Sometimes you can get lucky and the developers will give interviews later where they reveal what games they worked on, but if that happened, I couldn't find it. There is a company listed after the credits called Mandrill Club, and that is not a screenshot of the Japanese version. Even in the American release of the game, the credits for the club are given in Japanese. This company is only credited with one other game, and that being Super Wagon Land 2. So any information about them is extremely sparse, as is any information on what they did with this game. Maybe they only assisted development, or maybe they did the whole thing. I also don't know if this game was a heavy focus for Namco. It doesn't change much in terms of how the game we got was received, but it would be nice to know what the goals of the project were. Either way, I don't need a crystal ball to be able to guess that they began to worry when the reviews started to roll in. Reviews for Pac-Man 2 were mostly mixed, but they did lean slightly more positive than not, with the October 1994 issue of Nintendo Power proclaiming that the Pac is back and giving a quick guide on how to get through the first 2 acts, and in the reviews section, the reviewer notes that Pac-Man returns with an actual personality and to think of him as a real person, but also lamented that Pac is a lovable idiot with the intelligence of a signpost before giving the game scores in the upper 3s, but notably giving the controls the lowest score. These sentiments were echoed in GamePro magazine with their coverage of the Super Nintendo version in issue 62 and the Genesis version in issue 66, with the Unknown Gamer calling it very innovative in its use of an established character with a personality of his own, but also noting that while parts of the game are entertaining, you will be wondering what happened to the old-fashioned Pac-Man, and concluding that the game is not always fun, though it is intriguing. Bro Buzz's follow-up for the Genesis version was better received, writing that the low-speed action is best suited for curious kids, intermediate puzzle players looking for an intermediate challenge, and old-timers that just want to party with Pac-Man, and admitting that the fun factor relies on just how far you are willing to go to establish a relationship with Pac-Man. In other words, if you like Pac-Man, you might like this. Finally, GameFan had a brief review of the game by Nick Rocks, where he once again calls the game insanely original, but ends the review with, "If this sounds ultra boring to you, it probably will be." Which sounds obvious, yes, but it does make sense. If the idea of a Pac-Man point-and-click adventure game with unusual controls does not sound interesting to you, then nothing in the game proper is going to change that. The review also mentions that they would be taking a look at the game again in a later issue, but I couldn't find it. This is a common theme as I checked the holiday issues of these magazines to see if Pac-Man 2 would make any holiday issues or end-of-year lists, and it did not. The game was lauded for being unique, and then quickly forgotten about. While on the subject of reviews, there is one thing I want to mention now before they start showing up later. While searching for reviews, I searched for things from the game's launch and the game's lifetime, and I consider that lifetime to continue up to today. This means that I watched and will reference many video reviews on YouTube. I did this because I feel it plays a large part in the story of how this game is talked about. I have cited every source that I use in this video, from the previous magazine reviews to the video reviews later, and I will put my sources cited list in a pinned comment. If you feel that any of these might be taken out of context, you are more than welcome to watch the videos or read the articles yourself to see. I will finally add that any praise or criticism of any video review or magazine article is solely related to how everything relates to the game, and not any approval or disapproval of the reviewers themselves or the video on my part. Pac-Man 2 was released on the Super Nintendo in September of 1994, and 1 month later on the Sega Genesis. For the most part, the two versions are identical, with the main differences being the common changes of the era, such as soundtrack differences I will get to in a moment, and color palettes are also shifted with the Genesis version being darker. It also definitely does a better job with the Ghost Gang, as Blinky actually has his red color. As a whole, the Genesis version does a better job with the color red. The technical limitations are apparent at times, such as there being no transitional circle, so Pac-Man appears to hang for a second until a transition happens, and the Genesis could not create transparent layers, so those effects were replicated with dithering. I also noticed that the controls seemed less responsive, especially when dealing with Super Pac, and the final boss fight is made way easier, which I will get into during that part of the gameplay. The combination of the last two things is no doubt a reason behind this game's reputation, as many reviews I saw were based off of the Genesis version. Ultimately, the Genesis version is a really good port, but a port nonetheless, as the game seems to have been made for the Super Nintendo and makes better use of its capabilities. I did multiple playthroughs on both versions, and you will be seeing footage of both throughout, but know that I based most of this video on the Super Nintendo version, and that is the version I will be referring to unless otherwise mentioned. The music was composed by Namco veteran Katsuo Tajima, who at the time was known for composing the music for Splatterhouse, which made him an interesting choice for the slow-paced and cartoony Pac-Man 2. The choice would prove inspired, as the soundtrack blends into the game's setting well, and does a good job of setting a mood without being distracting, which is exactly what it should be doing. I don't think any of the songs will be played on repeat like Athletic Theme or E1M1, but they are very memorable in their own right, and I sometimes find myself humming the Village theme when I am at work. The introduction and factory themes deserve a special mention, as each character gets their own snippet of music that fits their personality in the introduction, with Pac Jr. getting a rock and roll theme, and the Ghost Witch getting something ominous. And the factory being much spookier and sinister sounding than the rest of the soundtrack. It doesn't fit with the other songs, which is great, as it shows just how unnerving the factory would be to Pac-Man. The sound design of the game itself is impeccable. The sound effects are clean and noticeable without being distracting, and Pac-Man was given this lilting chirping noise that almost sounds like a blend of a cat and a bird. It's unusual, but it works in giving Pac-Man expression. What truly works, and was even noted at the time, is how they pitched the voice up or down depending on the mood that Pac-Man was in. A happy Pac laughs with a high pitch, while a sad Pac will groan in a lower register. This even applies to the soundtrack, with the tracks increasing in tempo as Pac-Man gets happier, becoming frantic if he is angry, and slowing down if Pac is sad. This might seem simple now, but it was innovative when it came out. It seems like Katsuo Tajima, aka fucking Tajima, worked on both versions of this game, as he is listed in the Genesis credits proper and not just under the original staff section, and therefore the music is similar on both versions. Obviously, the Genesis and Super Nintendo had different sound hardware, so the Genesis version has more of a synth feel to it, and the Super Nintendo version has more sound channels that allows for a deeper feel. I have seen many comments that state the Genesis version has better audio, whereas the Super Nintendo had better art, but that feels too simple and easy. It's too both have their strengths, so no one is better. But I disagree. First, which music you enjoy is subjective, and if you like the Genesis's synthy sound effects, then the Genesis will sound better. If you don't, then stick with the Super Nintendo. However, there are times where it seems like the Genesis struggles with the songs, such as this part of the Super Pac theme. The other main difference is in Pac's voice. I don't know if they changed the voice because the sound chip on the Genesis couldn't handle it, or if they decided they didn't like how it turned out on the Super Nintendo and changed it for the Genesis as it released later. But it is noticeably different, and I much prefer the Super Nintendo version. If anyone had doubts as to whether Namco was right to call this game a cartoon, that would have changed when they saw this game in motion. This might be the most expressive Pac-Man there has ever been. While Pac has been pictured in arcade artwork and Pac-Land made him look like the cartoon, nothing compares to this. Pac-Man has nearly 1,000 frames of animation. And yes, that does consist of different faces being placed on different arm and leg motions that are repeated. His walk style alone is still very detailed and changes depending on his mood. This is far and away more detailed than anything else at the time. For the first time in a video game, Pac-Man has a personality. He has emotion. He wants to have fun. He gets scared. He gets full of himself. He'll pick fights. This animation of Pac-Man asking the player to spin him on this chair is one of my favorite animations in a video game. The Looney Tunes way he walks off the cliff and looks down the camera. or how he cheerfully points at a skateboard before immediately crashing into a tree shows how funny this game can be. And it is a bit of a shame that later Pac-Man games would tone down this aspect of the game. Combined with the sound design and the overall presentation, this game goes above and beyond. Pac-Man 2 is a beautiful game to watch. How does it control? Well,
Look. Look.
a lot has been said about how this game controls, and rarely is it positive.
That ain't the case in this game. You are just fucking with the environment and screaming at Pac-Man in hopes of proceeding through the game.
He walks in one direction indefinitely until you tell him to look otherwise. He's like a lemming. Not like it really matters anyway. Pac-Man's a friggin' moron and only selectively follows your advice. Just real nice.
Alright, so let's talk about the first problem I have. The fact that Pac-Man never does what you want him to. Oh, dear lord. Hey, look! Over here! You freaking moron!
You're not controlling Pac-Man, you just kind of shoot things in Pac-Man's face and you hope that his stupid, tiny pea brain can notice things.
I am a bit more lenient and think the controls are more unusual than bad, but the game definitely does not explain itself well. And if you combine this with the fact that Pac-Man can disobey orders if his mood is bad, and you have a recipe for misunderstandings. There are two main things that I think trip people up, and the first is spamming commands. It makes sense that if Pac isn't doing what you want, then yelling louder or more frequently could help. But in effect, this is like spamming F5 because your video isn't loading. Every time you give a command, Pac will stop and try to see what you are doing. Every time. So for every command or slingshot bullet, he will reset if he's not already locked in an animation, sometimes moving slightly. This can cause a window of opportunity to pass or for Pac to move out of range or too close to something. The best thing to do is to give a command and wait to see if Pac-Man reacts. Usually there is some sort of visual clue that he has noticed something to interact with. If not, you may need to line him up and do it again. This works, but it can definitely feel tedious and like you are herding cats. The second issue is the game's fault, and that is how it provides feedback. Pac likes to wait for a moment when he notices things before he walks over to do them, especially if his mood is low, and it can seem like he has forgotten what he was doing, or if he never actually noticed what you wanted. The other problem lies with the mood system itself. This system has been heavily criticized for how it plays and what it implies.
And Pac suffers from the most extreme case of bipolar disorder to ever be documented by mankind.
His stupid, tiny pea brain.
Because at this point, Pac-Man could be a cocky douche that gives other people shit for no f***ing reason.
The same things I could say to Pac-Man are the exact same things I say to my cats. Stop yelling at the birds, Scoot. Stop eating random plants, Scoot. Why are you breaking things, Scoot? What, you're mad at me now? 5 minutes ago we were best friends. You're lucky you're adorable, or I wouldn't stand for this. The reason for the convoluted system is because it is trying to replace a very important part of adventure games: inventory management. Adventure games of the time often struggled when they were placed on consoles, as using a D-pad like a mouse is tedious, and with limited buttons, trying to fiddle through menus is frustrating. So the solution that this game proposes is to do away with inventory items. They only exist to show progression. The point-and-click aspects are boiled down to shooting things with a slingshot, and instead of activating a look command, clicking on the item of interest, and having the main character give a pithy one-liner, there's now a dedicated look button that makes Pac-Man look in that general area. This fixes the problem of pixel hunting to find the right item or the right place to put an item. So now the solution to most rooms or puzzles is simply, is Pac-Man in the right mood? And the issue here is, again, feedback. Where the mood system fails is that Pac might approach an obstacle and not pass. All you know is that it didn't work, but not why. Maybe you need to be in a different mood. Maybe you need to shoot something. Maybe you can't pass and need to go around. Maybe it isn't a puzzle, but just something weird to poke at. Or maybe, like this puddle in the city, it is none of these things and it is timing based, and you need Pac to cross at a certain time, which is way more difficult than it needs to be. Pac-Man walks automatically, but they should have added a command where when you hold the button it makes him stop, then when you let go he bursts forward. They could have done a lot more timing puzzles with this sort of mechanic. Instead, we got this one, and it sucks. There are many other examples that I will go into later when they come up in the gameplay, but I will say that the system does work in molding an adventure game to a console, even if it looks and feels way jankier than it actually is. Most of the puzzles are simple enough to solve, and simply poking around the environment will usually give a clue as to what is needed to solve the puzzle. Also, while the system is odd, the game itself is still very tightly made, as usually there is something near every puzzle that will put Pac in the right mood to succeed. And even though I read about players becoming soft-locked, I never actually had that happen. Part of that was because of the way the game handles saving. It is common practice when playing adventure games to have no less than 30 rolling saves. Death may lurk around every corner, but I am not losing any progress. I admit I'm being overdramatic, but quick saving and loading is still important to the adventure game experience, as it encourages players to experiment and explore. But how does that work in a game with no battery saves? Well, through an unusually sophisticated password system. Sure, passwords have been around forever, but this game takes it a step further. Not only do you have your Indivac passwords that serve as easy checkpoints, and they do change depending on how many ID badges or cartridge pieces that Pac has, but the game even generates passwords continuously depending on the room that Pac-Man is in. This screen in the town has a password for every act, every combination of ID card, every cartridge piece, every inventory item, and the amount of power pellets. The only thing that isn't saved is Pac-Man's mood, and that is a blessing in disguise, as it ensures that you can never be soft-locked with an unwilling Pac-Man. The game even stores the code in its RAM, so if you reset the console instead of turning it off, it will automatically fill in the password for you, so you could use this as a quick load function. I'm no expert on password systems, but I have never seen a password system that works this well. I don't know how much time you really save by writing down a password for every room, but if you did, you could jump back into any part of the game at any time, which is something I wish I took better advantage of when I was gathering footage. But enough about the details around the game. Let's start it up and begin playing. After an introduction of the characters and selecting a new game, there is a brief tutorial where Pac-Man is introduced, and the player is revealed to be a fourth wall breaking version of you. The game then shows you the controls on how to guide Pac-Man and interact with the environment. After breaking several things, Pac-Man is led to this tree where we learn about power pellets. The power pellets are useful in two ways. The first way is shown immediately in the tutorial. They transform Pac-Man into Super Pac, his superhero alter ego, who chomps away all of the ghosts. This is a requirement for progression, as the Ghost Gang will carry items that Pac-Man needs to find to beat the game. The second and more utilitarian use is level traversal. As Super Pac flies back and forth across the screen, he ignores all obstacles and interactables in the screen, so the player could easily fly Pac to the screen exit and fly back and forth until he transforms back. Even better, when he transforms back, his mood is completely reset. So long as Pac-Man has a power pellet, he is never truly stuck. The player is limited to just 3, and outside of a few special circumstances where you can find one in the wild, the only way to get more is from the tree in Pac-Man's yard. This gives the pellets a Final Fantasy elixir effect, where the pellets are not used as often as they could. A wise player should still try to keep one at the ready, as being surprised by the Ghost Gang without a power pellet will lead to a ridiculously long scare scene that leads to a fail state. Super Pac's design draws some influence from the transdimensional character that was found in the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and they both draw influence from the original Pac-Man 2, the arcade game Super Pac-Man. In that game, there's an additional type of power pellet that makes Pac-Man fly. Or at least he's supposed to. His sprite enlarges to show that he is closer to the screen, he flies over any walls, and the ghosts become elongated to show a change in perspective, I guess? I thought the power was that he could phase through the walls and that the ghosts looked like that because they were weirdos. I mean, they are little weirdos. I don't know. I didn't like Super Pac-Man, and I'm in good company as Toru Iwatani didn't like Super Pac-Man either. Regardless, I like Anchor Arm Super Pac. His explosion of power when he appears, combined with the "oh shit" expressions of the Ghost Gang, do a good job of showing the table-turning mechanics of the arcade game in a new light. And that physique does have its fans.
Oh no, he's hot.
Once Super Pac chomps the Ghost Gang, the tutorial ends, and the game is ready to begin. Act 1 begins with Pac being assigned his most harrowing task yet. Pac Baby is out of milk, and Pac needs to go out for more. An army of dads have quested for the milk and have never returned. Luckily for Pac-Man, the milk is close by. Like, really close, as in one screen to the right. The only obstacle is getting past, or murdering, the farmer and knocking the bottle with a giant free label onto the ground next to the dairy cow. Milk in hand, Pac returns home, act complete. If you took this route, the next scene is thoroughly confusing, as the Ghost Gang returns to their lair where they get chastised by the Ghost Witch. "You've been beaten by Pac-Man?" When? Why do they need to be punished? They didn't do anything. Were they supposed to? What have they been doing this whole time? did they steal Miss Pac-Man's breast milk from the Pac fridge? The answer lies in the very beginning of this chapter. As Pac-Man leaves his house, he turns and walks to the left. Normally, I wouldn't think this matters, as the direction Pac-Man faces just alternates left and right in the following acts. But it does seem like the developers fully intended for you to go this way, as you are introduced to Lucy, given the first part of the Miss Pac-Man or Junior Pac-Man cartridge, and given a wordless tutorial on how to knock items off of signs. I do like how they show this, as the crow only appears when Pac comes in range of the Big Apple. If the player shoots the crow, it attacks, and the flapping of its wings will knock down the apple. Even better is if the player does nothing after alerting Pac to the apple, Pac-Man will be unable to grab the apple, but he will eventually scream at the bird, which will cause it to attack anyways. It is a natural way to give the player a clue as to how to get the bottle later. There is another natural tutorial on the next screen with the skateboard death trap. If Pac-Man is in a good mood, he will ride this skateboard. Once on it, however, he is guaranteed to crash into a tree if the player provides no input. The only way to save him and not get a screen reset is to shoot him, which makes him jump off. This is to show the player that in some animations, shooting Pac can make him jump. Or if, maybe, he is riding in something. The problem with this is the sometimes qualifier. Sometimes this is what happens. Sometimes it just makes him mad. Sometimes he stops, sometimes he doesn't. The only way to know is to try everything. Eventually, Pac will make it in a town where he will find the market closed, and the ghosts hiding in front of it. So maybe this was their plan? To shut down the store so the Pac kids would go hungry? That's a plan, I guess, but at least the player can learn how the game works. Sadly, while this would make more sense, the inclusion of these milk direction signs prevent this. It's doubtful that many new players would make it all the way to the town when they pass by two different signs telling them to turn around, unless they were actively exploring, which you should do in a game like this. But that just makes the signs even more counterproductive. It won't be the last time the game steps on its own feet like this. Act 2 is definitely where the game starts to pick up, though you wouldn't know it from the story. Lucy is having a birthday party, and everyone knows she loves mountain flowers. With the store still closed from whatever vile thing the Ghost Gang did to it, Pac is given a trolley pass to the mountains. It is here, on this mountain, where Pac-Men are made, as it is on this mountain where the fabled hang glider resides. Pac even runs in fear upon hearing it summoned. There's been a lot said about this section.
This hang glider is the shits.
These segments can be frustratingly hard,
and there are some good reasons for it. As Pac-Man is not controlled directly, he must be told to go higher, or shot at with the slingshot to make him go lower. What this means is that there's a baked-in input lag on every move that the player wants to make, which is an interesting design. Combine this with the fact that there are also obstacles that need to be weaved through, and the Ghost Gang needs to be shot away before they can knock Pac out of the sky. While I agree that the controls can be rough, there is only 2 buttons that are needed, and it would be nice if there was a dedicated aim at Pac button to make the dives easier to react to. I have to be honest and say that I feel that most of the more current criticisms feel badly overblown. I understand if you played this game as a child and couldn't get through. I did and only remember getting through once, but the truth is, this marathon level with no checkpoints
With no checkpoint.
is only 40 seconds long. I've already shown you the entirety of the level, and the level is not randomized. You can very easily remember where the obstacles are going to come from and have more than enough time to prepare for it. Once finished, it is a simple walk to get the flowers and back home. This is another spot that gets mentioned a lot as causing frustration, as Pac-Man needs to be in the right mood to even bother to look for the flowers, but there are multiple interactions, such as watching the birds or this rabbit, that will cheer him up. There are more paths on the mountain, including a secret path that I will get to later, but further down the main part of the mountain lies the minecart track. It is not necessary to do the minecart level at this moment, but it does need to be traversed at some point to beat the game, and since most players will probably stumble upon the part now, or intentionally do it now in order to save time later, we might as well cover it while we are here. The minecart track is similar to the hang glider in that it is a more action-packed segment where Pac-Man keeps the minecart moving, and the player's job is to prevent Pac from crashing. Once again, the Ghost Gang is trying to stop him, either by pushing rocks onto the track or crushing him to death with a giant pulverizer. The player can combat this by chasing off the ghost with a slingshot, telling Pac to speed up, or by making Pac jump over platforms by shooting him, similar to the skateboard from earlier, although the skateboard tutorial gets stepped on with this sign that just tells you everything anyways. While it is tempting to just shoot everything in sight and speed through the level as fast as possible, there are jumps that cannot be taken at speed and others that must be launched from. The pulverizers from the ghost must be avoided with proper timing, as shooting the ghost creates an unavoidable obstacle, so careful planning with smart shooting is required. The minecart garners similar criticisms to the hang gliding segment, with awkward controls and no checkpoints, but again I find the problem lies not with any difficulty, but the lack of it. The entire level can be beaten by only using the speed up button twice, and it is at the wide gaps that have ample lead up. Pac-Man is perfectly timed to avoid most of the traps and all of the pulverizers, so the player can focus on shooting the ghosts and jumping over the platforms. I'm sure that with time and patience, someone could figure out the exact number and timing of button presses to beat this level with the least amount of effort. Sure, you can still try to speed through the level to save time or provide your own challenge, but once you know that you absolutely do not need to, it definitely takes some of the fun out of it. The minecart leads to an area with more ghosts, an ID card, another game cartridge, and a shortcut back to the mountain entrance that opens once Pac gives the computer the old Kentucky tune-up. This is where Pac should head home, but I want to talk about these action segments more in general, as whether or not there should be more action-based or combat-oriented segments in adventure games has been an ongoing debate. Adventure games have long been stuck with the stigma of being boring, or games you watch or read as opposed to games you play, and developers would often try to add more frantic timing or skill-based sections to give their games more excitement or broader appeal. This is similar to the stigmas that were attached to the really dense RPGs from the 90s. The problem with this is that fans of point-and-click adventure games often do not want these additions, as it is the slower and more methodical pace that they crave. These games are won or completed by taking your time and thinking your problems through as opposed to a test of skill. A common retort to the earlier criticisms is power of mind over swiftness of reflexes. So broader adventure games try to walk a fine line. The action must be engaging, but simple. Too easy and it's boring. Too hard and you lose your core audience. Pac-Man 2 tries to walk this line with the hang glider and minecart segments, and to mixed results. While the segments are goofy and tight mechanically, I can see the reason why they are often criticized for being a sudden increase in difficulty, even if the segments are, to me, not that difficult. I want to be perfectly clear here, even if I find the segments easy, it doesn't change anything for those that wanted a laid-back adventure game and were breezing through the first act only to be told that they now had to operate a hang glider while making precise attacks with a slingshot at the same time. I wouldn't be surprised if anybody stopped playing after doing these sections, as there is no hint that there are no more of these mandatory action scenes left in the game until the final boss. If you do both in Act 2, that's it, which only makes this act feel even more lopsided. It may seem like I do not like these, as I have been fairly harsh on their inclusion, but the truth is that I do. If the intended goal of this game was to be an interactive cartoon, then these sections succeed in that. Especially with the ghosts and their antics. Seeing them try to literally punch Pac-Man out of the sky with a boxing glove on a stick, or seeing Pac freak out as he slowly rolls to a giant rock crusher, or realizing that so much of the Ghost Gang's plan is to just hit him with a rock, is funny, and feels like something I would have watched on a Saturday morning cartoon as a child. Still, it is a shame that they are so easy to beat once you learn the pattern. Speaking of cartoons, once Pac finally returns home, he finds that the party has already started, and that Pac Jr. has given Lucy a flower of his own, and evidently Pac didn't need to climb the mountain to get it, meaning that his constant, near-death experiences were for nothing. Apparently, the Ghost Gang is in agreement with me that Pac Jr. might be the brains of the household, as they immediately target him next by stealing his guitar. Either that, or they just love to target small children. Pac-Man isn't going to stand for this, however, and gets a train pass from his hot wife and heads downtown. Downtown is like the first area, but more so. There are more things that can tank Pac-Man's mood or result in a fail state, and the end goal is far less obvious to find. In fact, Pac must travel across multiple screens and search throughout downtown before the target will even appear. Unlike the milk, if you rush to where the security guard will appear, he won't be there. This is not necessarily a bad thing, as some of the more entertaining interactions appear here, like Pac-Man getting a balloon and immediately losing it, or fulfilling an inflation fetish. And there's also some weird depth behind this piano. When Pac sees the piano, he will walk over and start playing it. Even better, what song he plays changes depending on his mood, which is a nice touch. However, downtown also solidifies the claims of Pac-Man being emotionally unsteady, as he can go from happy to sad to angry and back in one screen. Combine this with the mood-required goals or objects that can trap you, and it leads to a frustrating experience. Take this soda machine for example. When Pac-Man sees it, he will nearly always try to buy a soda, and it will always eat his quarter. This will make him angry and will start a slot machine to see if he actually gets a soda. I only got this to work out once and of course didn't capture it. Every other time, it merely killed Pac-Man's mood, which is annoying as it seems unavoidable. Or it would be until I learned that if you tell Pac-Man to turn around right after he turns to look at the machine, he will turn back and continue on his way. The thing is, with the way this works and the lack of any feedback, I don't know if this is intended. As in, you are refocusing Pac-Man on his efforts, or if by timing it like this, I'm bugging out the game's coding and overriding what he should be doing. It doesn't feel right, but it works at getting rid of an annoying problem, so I'm going to take it. Another potential problem is that since this act shares a location with the next one, it is possible and likely that the player will stumble upon the final area early. Pac won't be able to do anything, but it can spoil some of the fun around the last act. Once Pac has taken care of the ghost hiding in this trash can, a suspicious guard will appear at the factory gate. Get Pac in a mood to fight and harass him enough, and the ghost gang will appear with the stolen guitar. I want to add that I had a lot of trouble getting this to happen consistently on the Genesis version. I think it is still tied to Pac-Man's mood, but it seemed random and far less reliable than it did on the Super Nintendo version. With the guitar, Pac can return home and bear witness to an impromptu concert from Junior. I think in about 10 years, he changes his name to Pat Clapton and hits the road. Junior has a lot of fun character given to him in this game, and it is a shame we never got a follow-up anything with him, other than being kidnapped in World and being phased out for Pac-Boy.
This is it. All the training, all the years of stealing milk and hiding in trash cans, and it never really prepares you for when the moment arrives. When you're prying chewed bubblegum from a kid's mouth to help punished mommy make the ultimate weapon. A weapon that could surpass Metal Gear.
Yes, the Ghost Gang is at it again. Only this time, the Ghost Witch reveals herself and calls out Pac-Man, telling him that soon he won't be able to stop her. The only clue is that the ghosts were last seen headed to the abandoned factory. With clenched fists and gritted teeth, Pac-Man steps out to stop her. As this act takes place in the same area as the last one, it can be completed quickly depending on how much legwork has been done prior. If the player has been exploring every area and chomping the ghosts as they have been found, then Pac should have 2 of the 3 needed key cards to get into the last area. The only thing left is to find this impossible to miss elevator and fight the ghosts that just show up. It definitely feels like this was tacked on. Regardless, the elevator must have broken, as there's no other way down than to explore the rooftops. But this is a blessing in disguise, as what follows shows what this game can do when it is using its mechanics properly. To get across the roofs, there are multiple gaps that must be cleared. If Pac is in a really good mood, he will jump across the gap with ease. If he is in a middling mood, he could ride this hook, and the player can shoot him to give him a boost, but the player must also shoot him off of the hook in the right moment, or Pac will crash into the wall. If Pac-Man is in a bad mood, then he will try to jump on his own, but will stop short of the ledge as he gets too scared. The player will need to motivate him at the right moment to get him to jump. I love this section as proof that the odd system this game relies on can work, as it rewards a player that has been successful in keeping Pac's mood up with having him auto-complete the jumps. Thinking outside the box can also bypass the section entirely with either using the hook or with giving Pac a power pellet and having Super Pac fly across. Players that are struggling with keeping Pac-Man happy can still cross, but will need to press the issue with more effort and better timing. The opposite of this is the matter of getting into the sewers to get into the factory. The only way in is to get Pac to blow open the sewer access by taping up this fire hydrant. The problem? Pac must be in an angry mood to do this. Any other mood and he will try to fix the hydrant and ignore it when it does not work. You have to make Pac angry and, more importantly, keep him angry as he travels across a city full of things that will change his mood. Adding to this is that opening the sewer will scare Pac-Man, and that there is another secret in the sewers that again requires Pac-Man to be angry, and it gets very tedious, constantly backtracking to get everything to work. I did discover a trick using the piano and this wall hot dog that I call the hot dog manipulation strat. Step 1. Play the piano to make Pac-Man happy. Step 2. Shoot Pac-Man so he gets angry enough to push this shopping cart, which reveals a wall hot dog. Step 3. Have Pac-Man eat the wall hot dog so he becomes brave enough to fight. You may have to shoot him again if the hot dog makes him too happy. But even though it works, too much hot dog manipulation abuse just doesn't feel right. Once through the sewers, we enter the Factory of Doom itself, complete with an atmospheric soundtrack and multiple death traps that require a careful eye to spot. Once again, the mood system works well here, as different moods react to the traps in different ways, but a careful player can still navigate the factory with a reluctant partner, or feed Pac power pellets to fly past. Except for one, however, and unfortunately it may be the only one that really matters. At the end of the factory, Pac is faced with large, multi-numbered door where he must put in 3 key cards under the correct numbers. If Pac does not have the 3 ID cards, then the player must travel around the map to find them. If you take too long to guess, then Pac will take his own guess and, of course, get it wrong. If you or Pac get the code wrong, then the Ghost Gang appears, which... Wait, is that Sue? Where have you been the whole time?
What's the matter, Missy? Did somebody flush all your tampons? Good luck going to the market to buy more.
Regardless, you do not get another guess, as the door seals and Pac leaves the factory, meaning to take another guess, you have to go all the way through the sewers and the factory. So where is this combination at? Well, here, behind these pans. But to get Pac to notice, the player needs to shoot the first pan. Only the first pan, as any others will make a sound, but be ignored. Pac also needs to be in the right mood to get angry enough to smash the pans off of the wall. But he can't be angry or else he just throws the pan and doesn't reveal anything. If he is sad, he will point to it and be scared. It is entirely possible that a player will finally get Pac to notice the pans only to have him throw the first one and reveal that there is nothing behind it. And there is no clue that the player should be looking for a code at this point, or that the code is in the factory proper to begin with. I have no defense for this puzzle, and I do not know why they didn't put part of the code under the first pan, or have Pac react to shooting the other pans. I guess this other pan in the room that triggers a Ghost Gang fight could be a clue, and the super pellet that you would need to use in the fight would reset Pac-Man's mood to the correct state that is needed, but that really only works if you already know the solution. The fact that the game stumbles quite literally at the final door after seemingly finally finding its footing on what the game is supposed to be is nothing less than a major letdown. But what lies behind the final door? What vile machination has the Ghost Witch created? The gum monster. Above nothing else, the Ghost Witch wants to drown Pac in gum. The goal is to shoot the monster in the face to shrink it down and to help Super Pac avoid the arms so he can chomp the ghost before they can heal the monster. A decent idea if it weren't for the fact that it is so simple. You really only need to shoot his arms once to get enough of an opening for victory. And that is for the Super Nintendo version. On the Genesis, for some reason, not even that amount of effort is needed. You can just shoot the monster continuously and you will win. Quickly. It seems they up the damage that the monster takes, and I really don't know why. I fully understand anyone who had the Genesis version and found this fight to be a real letdown, as it is so easy as to be trivial. And the Ghost Witch? Despite all of the build, she does nothing but run back and forth. If the fight is abrupt, the ending is almost comically abrupt. The Ghost Witch is like, "Shit! You got me," and runs away. The town kids are thankful, but annoyed they didn't get their gum back, and credits. Despite this, the hydrant, and the door code, This final act really shines at moments. The factory and rooftop show what this game can do when all the mechanics are working together, which makes it a shame that this is the end. It feels like this should be a midpoint, with the rest of the game being whatever else the Ghost Witch had planned, and she never gets a comeuppance in this game. It feels like the game ends before it can truly get up to speed. This may have been the point all along, as after the credits, the player receives a letter from Pac-Man that scores the player based on how many scenes or interactions the player has witnessed. And your reward for finding more of these scenes is passwords that let you play the arcade games directly, a sound test, an animation viewer, or even unlock a time trial mode. Completion is not in beating the game, but in watching more of the cartoon. And, to be fair, the game is much better on a replay. By now, the player has probably gotten the hang of how the game controls and how the mood system can be manipulated. Once you know the solutions to the puzzles, the only thing left is to explore the world and find more weird things for Pac-Man to do. Want to eat the mind-expanding berries on the mountaintop? You know you do. You want to spin this wheel? Huh? A lot of effort was clearly placed into the animations, and now is the time to find them. But it is not the only thing to look for. I have mentioned them before, but there are a couple of secret areas for Pac to find that lead to optional versions of the action scenes from before. The first secret area is a hang gliding section that plays similarly to the original. But this time the Ghost Gang is much more aggressive and they never give Pac a break. And the player must be better at maneuvering Pac through the rocky areas, and this time the Ghost will attack in the tricky maneuvering sections. They are no longer separated. Upon making it to the end, Pac is deposited into the park in the first area. The other secret area is a bit more hidden, as it isn't on the mountain like the other three action segments, but more players will probably stumble upon it naturally, as it can be uncovered if an angry Pac chases the thieves in the sewers, which reveals a secret door, which leads to a second minecart level. First off, I have to point out this color palette. I love this cave. It has this high fantasy vibe that a few games of this area could hit. It looks like it belongs in an old JRPG or something. As for the level itself, it is hard. Very hard. This is easily the most difficult section in the entire game. The ghosts are relentless, and the timing on the pulverizers is much tighter and requires mixing fast and slow movements. For example, this spot requires Pac to begin speeding up as soon as Pinky appears on screen so that he will slow down in time for Inky. The platform sections have been expanded as they are now grouped tighter and require Pac to bounce off of multiples in a row to be safe. Did I say the ghosts are relentless? Because they swarm Pac even when he is dealing with other obstacles, and at times I felt like it was high noon at the OK Corral with the way I was snapshotting these ghosts, and I only beat this level with the narrowest possible margin on this last shot. I don't think it gets any closer than this. And maybe it doesn't get this close. Let's move on. After reaching the end, Pac finds a rope that leads right to the bushes outside his house. Is this the secret passage the ghost used to steal things from Pac's house? How often are they just watching? As a whole, these secret paths are great additions to the game, as they give an extra challenge that is sorely missing from the rest of the game while being entirely optional for those that do not want it. Some of these challenges, such as bouncing off of multiple platforms or the more intense boulder weaving, shows the progression of the game's systems that we don't normally see. The supposed reward for doing these levels is a shortcut home, but whereas the minecart one is great, literally ending in Pac-Man's front yard, the hang glider is actually slower, as Pac has to walk past the mountain exit and gets placed 2 screens from his house as opposed to just 1. Still, I highly recommend finding and playing these areas as they show what this game could do, and I will bring this up again in my final wrap-up. But with that, Pac turns off the television, and the game is over. Pac-Man 2 did not have much going for it leading into its release, and it didn't seem to have much fanfare coming out. The few reviews that exist post-launch were middling, if leaning positive, and it becomes very difficult to find reviews or articles about the game that were made well after the game came out. This doesn't mean the game didn't have its fans, as I have stumbled upon the odd fan page or GameSpot review, and I always love finding these as they are like little time capsules of the internet. But as time goes on, any chatter around the game gets quieter and the game is, for the most part, ignored. There are still some notable events, however, and I have peppered them throughout this video. The first is the 2014 AGDQ, where this game is put on display, and in 2016 the Super Nintendo version is put up for sale on the Wii U Virtual Console. There was a small audience of Wii U owners to be sure, but it does mark the first time in 22 years that the game was available for purchase, and a few modern reviews, although now around 10 years old, begin to pop up. While there aren't that many, they do share a common theme in how this game was remembered, and whereas the game was seen as wholly unique if slightly frustrating when it came out, that is not the case anymore.
The worst video game I've ever played.
Why do people like this game so much? What the f*** is wrong with you assholes?
F*** this game and f*** Pac-Man.
While I can't say that I agree, I will be fair and point out that some of these reviews are around 10 years old, and that was the popular style when they came out. They are reviews, yes, but are also entertainment. However, there is another thing that kept getting mentioned.
It's an interesting game. It's worth having in your collection.
Okay, so I would be lying if I didn't say I actually enjoyed the crazy adventures that Pac-Man went through here, but like...
Pac-Man's cute little voice and things like that just bring a smile to my face.
I can't blame anybody for falling into this weird dichotomy of loving and hating this game at the same time. This game, as I'm sure is obvious by now, is weird and hard to define. But ultimately, I do really like this game. There is an earnestness in how this game handles its humor. No matter what happens, no matter how weird things get, Pac-Man never breaks. There is no wink to the camera. Pac-Man never acknowledges how absurd the gum monster is. The comedy is taken so seriously that it only amplifies it, and that earnestness carries over into how the game is played. The point of the odd interactions is to make the player laugh, while also being a serious game. There is a flip side to this coin, however. Does it work? Does the game succeed at making an interactive cartoon? I can best show the full spectrum of this with my favorite scene in the game, and it is the beginning of the final act. As stated before, we are first shown a newsreel of the Ghost Gang stealing gum from children, with Clyde pulling the gum from a child's mouth like he's playing tug of war with a dog. Inky is playing keep away, and Pinky is making faces at a crying kid. The broadcast is interrupted by the Ghost Witch, who calls out Pac and says his ass is next.
Yeah. 1, 2, 5. Yeah, I know what makes you tick. Yeah, guaranteed victory. I'm gonna tell you one last time.
Pac.
Mania is dead.
When we cut back to Pac, he's pissed. In every other act, Pac-Man greets the day with a smile, but not this time. He hits the streets with clenched teeth and ready to fight. It's really funny, and it works due to how serious this absurd situation is treated. And it lasts about one screen. Then the game kicks in, and Pac-Man gets happy looking at a cow, or sad about losing a hot dog, and by the time you get to the factory, any momentum has been gained and lost many times over. This shows just how inconsistent this game can be. This is normal for a first outing, especially for a game that is taking such a break from its predecessors and trying to make a new type of game, even if heavily inspired from point-and-click adventure games. One of the things I kept seeing that really annoyed me was people stating that the game shouldn't have been made or should have taken a more safe route.
It's an idea that should have never been thought up in the first place.
Why didn't they make a platformer? Why did they not make this game a platformer? Why is it like...
What is really annoying is that I get the feeling that the same people that would say this would also be the types to talk about how AAA gaming has stagnated. I will always prefer for a dev team to take a swing on a wild idea, even if it fails. The thing that Pac-Man 2 needed was a Pac-Man 2 2. I wish that Namco took another swing at this. There are things like the jump puzzle on the mountain that only gets used once, or the secret paths that act as shortcuts that could work well in a bigger game. The inventory system could be more refined so that some items open up faster paths, or different missions require Pac to take items from one place to another instead of just back home. Maybe areas that require more visual puzzles to progress, such as in the Lost Woods area of Paper Mario. If the mood system was more refined so that Pac doesn't seem so unstable, it could be a better alternative to the pixel hunting that some point-and-click adventure games turn into. And it is a real shame that we finally get a Pac-Man that is this well animated, this expressive, and never again. If the original arcade received a Miss Pac-Man upgrade that took the original game and improved it, then we should have gotten a Miss Pac-Man Adventures. Or Pac Jr. If Nintendo can have a game centered around a kick-ass rock and roller, so can Namco. I want to add something here in editing, as I think I need to clarify this section a little more, as I don't like to just say, they could make this better, without giving an example that could actually be possible with the game we have. What I mean about the jump puzzle is that I would like to see a longer version of this, ideally one in which the answer doesn't involve you needing to use all of the platforms. The problem with the puzzle we got is that you probably only fail it the first time and then you immediately get it, which is great for an introduction, but not for the only puzzle that is like this. As for the Lost Woods idea, in case you haven't played the original Paper Mario, is for a puzzle in which there are multiple exits from a room, but the player needs to spot a small difference or listen for an audio cue to find the correct door that doesn't loop back to the beginning. One last idea I had is that they could do like the Lemmings game, where they pull the camera back and you see a large multi-level room with different levers and buttons that open and close different doors and platforms. Since Pac-Man auto-walks, the puzzle would be for the player to time shooting different things to clear a path forward. I also think that all of these more involved puzzles should have something at the end that opens a secondary pathway back that bypasses everything, so that you only need to do the puzzle once per playthrough. I hope you see that there are a lot of fun options that a second game could have. The last thing I want to clarify here is about the point of there being a sequel in the first place, especially when this one can be so frustrating. If the game didn't work, why not just move on and try something else? The best examples I can think of are Street Fighter and Simon's Quest. Let me be clear, these are examples, not comparisons. I do not for a second think that a second Pac-Man 2 would be as revolutionary as Street Fighter 2. But I want to point out that the first Street Fighter, while a success in its own right, still failed in its first incarnation with a punching pad, and Capcom had to reissue the cabinet with its 6-button layout. And no matter how successful it was, I don't think that game would be remembered so fondly if it wasn't for its sequel Street Fighter 2, which iterated on and put a bigger focus on the combo system and added more unique fighters. As for Simon's Quest, that game is like Pac-Man 2 in that while it was received well for its unique spin on Castlevania 1, retrospective reviews later were very harsh. It may be getting a softer look now, but I definitely remember it being widely considered as the worst Castlevania and the one you skip. However, we now know that Koji Igarashi used the exploration aspects of Simon's Quest as the basis for Symphony of the Night. We had to struggle through the janky mess that Simon's Quest could be to end up with what is considered one of the greatest games of all time. And while again I doubt that Pac Jr. Adventures would be an all-timer, I do think it could have been really good. Anyways, I hope that clarifies my stance a little. Let's get back to it. The reason I wanted to do this video was because I always wondered why this game seems to have fallen through the cracks despite being the only original Pac-Man game of this generation. Why this game only ever received 1.5 re-release, especially since the reviews, while not great, weren't bad either. But therein might lie the answer. While doing research, I was going through old gaming magazines and was looking through Nintendo Power, and just flipping through the pages getting to the Pac-Man review, I was passing articles on Donkey Kong Country, Final Fantasy VI, Earthworm Jim, and after turning the page after the Pac-Man review, I was jump scared by Illusion of Gaia. This is when I finally started to understand. It turns out 1994 was a hell of a year. Sonic 3, Super Metroid, System Shock, Doom 2, DKC, Wing Commander 3, Final Fantasy VI, Illusion of Gaia, Earthworm Jim. Even looking back from a historical perspective, this is a year of historical beginnings and cult classics, with Elder Scrolls Arena, Earthbound, Warcraft 1, and a little-known business software company released a debut project they titled Kingsfield. The truth is, Pac, the game was rigged from the start. 1994 is an odd window where a game like The New Adventures could come out, where developers had mastered 2D design and figured out their console hardware, a time where weird experiments could happen. But this was also a terrible time for a game to just be fine. The 500-pound gorilla coming out in a month was not going to let people talk about a game being mediocre. The Sega Saturn would be out in Japan in November, with the PlayStation 1 coming out just 2 weeks later, and deserved or not, the public was hungry for 3D or games that looked 3D, and Pac-Man 2 wasn't it. With Namco going all in on the PlayStation and being a vital partner to the console's success, it's possible that this game was a holdover for the previous generation while the company focused heavily on PlayStation development, but its middling acceptance guaranteed that the next original Pac-Man adventure was going to be in full 3D, for better or for worse. Beyond release, even if some did want to go back and play this game, Namco hasn't made it easy. With the only re-release on the Wii U now being unavailable after the Virtual Console was shut down, it does not exist in the Namco museums or the Pac-Man Museum, being the only Super Nintendo release to not be included despite again being the only original game. This is not entirely Bandai Namco's fault, as due to the ongoing lawsuits and settlements over Miss Pac-Man and the inclusion of the original arcade version of Miss Pac-Man in the game itself, a simple change of sprites isn't going to be enough. I'm sure a resourceful player can find a way to play the game regardless, and I think that people should be able to play this game, if nothing else than to see that this type of game should still be around. The idea of the main character interacting with the world outside of your direct control can be used to great effect in establishing a character's worldview or personality, maybe to help flesh out side characters in bigger franchises, or explore worlds where character interaction is the appeal, such as Hello Kitty, or even as a game trying to be like a Saturday morning cartoon. This game is truly unique. Even in its own time, it was praised for its uniqueness, and sadly, that has been pushed aside to focus on the more negative aspects. That's a shame, as I would rather have developers take a swing on a new idea and try to make that idea work, but there is still nothing really like Pac-Man 2. This oddball interactive cartoon died with a whimper, only occasionally being dragged back out to be mocked for how weird it is. Which is odd to me, as Pac-Man as a franchise has often tried to push against its own walls. At inception, when Toru Iwatani tried to create an arcade game that would bring female game players into arcades, to Pac-Land as an early 2D platformer, to Pac-Man 2, to Pac-World, and even looking ahead to Shadow Labyrinth, a game that takes the core concepts of Pac-Man, the maze, the eating, and turning the tables on your opponent, and tries to make a new game with them. Hopefully, this time they learn to get the hell out of Donkey Kong's way. Not all of these ideas were successes, but you can't fault the effort to keep Pac-Man novel, and that is definitely true here. If you like retro gaming, or if you like unusual adventure games and you missed this game, you should give it a play. As an experience, an interactive cartoon as it were, Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures may not be a gem, but it deserves to be remembered. There is one odd thing that didn't fit anywhere else, but it's too weird to leave it out. On the Pac-Man Wikipedia page, in the introduction itself, is the word fuck. And it is so funny how it's just slid in like an A-side. Someone is talking about how supposedly the game was going to be called Pac-Man, but they changed it due to fears of people vandalizing the machine. It makes sense. But they even add that someone could add an F letter, just to make it blatantly obvious what could happen. But no, that's not enough. Someone just leans in and goes, as in fuck. The truly funny thing is that since the story is about how the developers were afraid of kids seeing the F word, they are now guaranteed to see it. I'll be honest, of all of the mascots, I always assumed it would be Crash Bandicoot that taught kids how to swear, but I'm somehow not surprised that it's Pac-Man. If you can think of a better mascot to teach children how to swear, let me know in the comments, or just feel free to ask me questions. If there are any good ones, I'll put them in the next video. Until then.